the last of our 4-part community education series focused on caring and communicating with older adults who may need social or other supports in their day-to-day life. As a non-profit agency focused on elder care issues in New Jersey, Volunteer Guardianship One-on-One, affectionately known as VGU, understands the challenges facing caregivers and guardians of older adults. And with over 20 years of practice in the area, we're familiar with the resources and solutions available. We shared our experience coordinating services for older adults in our previous 3 sessions. We've covered caring for an aging parent, accessing resources for older adults, and how to connect with your loved one or ward during COVID. Today, in our 4th and final community education session of this series, we'd like to discuss the engine that keeps our organization running: volunteers. VGU is a community guardianship program that only works because of the willingness of volunteers to carry out the substantial duties of a guardian, to be responsible for making all decisions for another person. Often someone you haven't met before can be an intimidating task, but we'll hear from volunteers and volunteer guardians today on why the reward for volunteering is worth the effort and responsibility. I'm Jonathan Wall, a trustee for VGU, and today I will talk to some members of the Hunterdon County community on volunteerism, what motivates them to volunteer, and what their volunteerism means to the community. Marcia Atkinson, Christine Jeffries, Lisa Zamorsky are volunteer guardians with VGU. Well, hello, Lisa.
Hello.
I understand that you've been a VGU. You served as a legal guardian for incapacitated older women for how many years?
Almost 2.
And how did you hear about VGU?
So I was at a point in my life when everything was changing, and I was looking to kind of look outside myself and figure out how I could take my focus off of my own problems and go and help somebody else. So I actually just did a Google search of volunteer opportunities in Hunterdon County, and I wish I could remember which site it was actually on, but that's how I came across it. And I started to read a little bit more of it. I met with the director of volunteers, Linda Patrick. She told me about the wonderful organization, and it just clicked. Like, once I talked to her, the whole thing just clicked, and I said, I want to give this a try.
And how involved was the training? And how good was the mentoring? I mean, what's the process?
So the training took a few weeks. There was a temporary guardian assigned to the woman that I originally was going to be assigned to, and in that time frame they took that opportunity to give me training on how to be a guardian, different classes that you take online. They put me together with that temporary guardian to have her take on it and get everything put together. So I want to say the training took maybe a few weeks. It's a little bit self-paced, so I think you could take longer if you need it, or less time if you need it. I have experience doing community nursing, so I had seen situations where people definitely needed a guardian and didn't have one. So the opportunity to help somebody just sort of, when it almost felt like it fell in my lap, and I wanted to take it.
So there's a certain level of comfort that you had because of your professional experience that you're able to move in and start right with some good training and feel confident that you could address some important matters with it.
There was. I think I had personal and professional experience going into it that helped me move things along maybe a little bit quicker. But there were a lot of things that I didn't know, and all of those things were addressed by the organization. And had I not known as much as I did, I think I still would have been comfortable. There just would have been a longer training period.
So, Marcia and Christine, tell me how you were introduced to VGU and also about the learning curve for you.
Well, I retired from the Board of Social Services in 2004, In 2006, Chris Dye told me that she had this woman that she was working with at the Office on Aging. She needed a guardian, and since I wasn't doing anything, I could be, her guardian. So I had 40 years of social work behind me before I went into it, and I had retired as deputy director, so I knew all the Medicaid regs and all that other stuff going into it. And this woman when I got her, she was still living in the community. She was not in a nursing home. And I probably had her about 3 or 4 years, and then I went on to the next one, and the next one, and the next one.
That's a big commitment.
It was, but I have a problem with I can never stop things. Once I get them started, I have a big problem with saying no.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm working on that.
And Chris Dye who's also a trustee on VGU,
Right.
can be pretty convincing.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And Christine,
Yes.
tell us about your experience.
So I learned about VGOO through my husband, who actually sat on the board for a while, Mark Jeffries. So that's how we learned about it. And I would go to some of the galas and the recognition balls that were thrown, and I would listen to caregivers get up and speak about their experiences and some of the rewards that they felt from doing it. And it inspired me. And it made me realize, well, what am I doing? What am I doing with my time? And, I'd always considered myself somewhat selfish, and this was an opportunity to do something selfless.
Yes.
So that's really what drew me to it. The time commitment worried me because I have a full-time demanding job. So I approached a friend of mine who was feeling a similar need to do something that was supporting the community. And so I brought this up to her, and she has always had a very soft spot and caring spot for taking care of folks who can't take care of themselves. And so it fit perfectly for us. So we did it as a joint guardianship. So she and I are co-guardians for Margaret.
Excellent.
Yes, yeah.
So instead of being overwhelmed, you're able to divvy up some of the responsibility.
Exactly, which works well. So there's no really definition of who does what for us. We pitch in when the other can. So basically we share all the responsibilities. So we're guardian of the property as well as guardian of the person, meaning that we're dealing the financial things as well as the health benefit things. And so we divvy it up where we can.
Because I know that Lisa and Marcia come in with an extraordinary level of expertise as professionals, and they're able to use that effectively. Professionally, did you have that same?
No, I'm an accountant. So I did not really have any sort of experience with that. Very little, because Mark and I also run a senior care assistance company, but he does most of that, and I did pitch in to be a caregiver a few times. But that was very limited experience. So no, it was really more just a willingness to want to do it. And what I found and it did seem daunting not knowing what I would be doing, but the resources at Volunteer Guardianship are immense. I mean, if you have questions on anything from legal to personal service to realty, as I'm going through now, there's always someone there who's either been through it or has a resource to help you. So that's made it it made it easier to deal with.
So if a volunteer candidate who is not gifted working with numbers and finances would be able to call for help, or even be paired with another volunteer to help take on that load.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Potentially,
That's
yeah.
helpful. Yeah. And there's a lot of people in the community who are well-intentioned, but they feel overwhelmed, especially with this COVID issues. How do you, how do we deal with COVID, and also in terms of time? You always hear complaints from people, they just don't have enough time in their life. So let's start off with COVID. Has that been a problem as far as tending to the needs of your own as well as working with the person?
So my ward actually passed away in January of this year, so I didn't have to deal with any of the COVID issues coming up with that. As far as time, when I first started this, I was in between jobs. I was only working part-time, so there was an element of time that I had. I did acquire a full-time job on top of that while I was still her guardian, and I think it just fits in. The same as doing anything else that becomes part of your life, it just fits into that. And that was actually the question that most of my friends would say to me. They'd say, well, when do you have time to do it? That's something I don't want to do till I retire. And I'd say it just becomes part of it, you know? It becomes the same as you would visit a friend that had to go to the hospital, or a family member that invited you to dinner. If you work it into your life.
Well, that's what's good, even with you, Marcia, you say you have trouble saying no. And you always find, and a lot of times with volunteers, is the person, if you want something done, you ask the person who's the busiest person, because there's a willingness just to get your hands into the mix.
I think you get more done when you're busy.
Yeah.
I mean, that is always the way it's been for me. And whenever I start slowing down, then I start saying to myself, well, what are you doing for anybody else? So I've got to work on that. But it's not really, to me, it's not that difficult to stop by. And you're not talking about you got to spend 3 hours with a person one time. You can stop by for a half an hour or 40 minutes or an hour and find out what they're interested in. Like, one lady knitted, so I brought my knitting and we sat there and knitted. Not a big deal, but that made her happy. So you just got to work with where they are, not where you are.
So there's different levels of ability on some of the wards as far as how
Yes.
active they are?
Well, there's also different levels in how well their mental health is. And you get people who are in the beginning stages dementia. You get situations where the family has taken a truckload of money, and you have to work around that because under the state laws with Medicaid, if I give to her all my money and they look back 5 years and they're like, well, you gave this person $80,000, you're not eligible. I had a woman who the family brought her to the emergency room. She was admitted in February when the medical center was ready to discharge her. The family refused to take her. So the medical center had her, and then I picked her up. So I saved her money and pension that was coming in until I had like $20,000. And then I went to the hospital and I said, since you're paying $39,000 a month for her to stay here, and I've got some money and she becomes eligible in December, could you throw in some more money? And they're like, sure. So we got her out of the hospital and got her into a nursing home. But part of the way I did that is I was also on a board at the hospital. So I knew what the financial powers to be, and I knew how much money the hospital was losing every month.
But isn't there a state program that takes care of? What's the value? Why does VGU even exist if we have services from the state?
You don't. You don't have services from the state. They have a guardianship program, but I think they probably have 4 or 5 people running it, and you can't do the state of New Jersey with 4 or 5 people. And the Adult Protective Services programs are run a little differently depending on what county you're in, and some people may interpret it that when I gave her my money, that was my choice and I did that, and now I have to have the repercussions of why I did that. And they don't take in consideration that if she's in charge of my money, it's clear on the bank account, and she's shifting off all this money, that really wasn't my choice.
Especially if the person is in the early stages of dementia where their judgment is impaired.
And basically the other thing too, when you get these people, it's like a brand new baby. You get no birth certificates, you get no financial records, you get nothing. So you have to go out and find this stuff, and you have to find the bank accounts. Like one lady, I arranged the funeral because I was trying to get her on Medicaid, and that was the way you could spend some of her money. I went to one funeral home, did the funeral, gave them the money. I was going to do Medicaid eligibility, was going to be that day at 4:30, and they called me back and said, Marcia, we already have a paid funeral on this woman. So So I said, don't give me that money back because I'll lose my eligibility for Medicaid. So I went back in and I had a bigger funeral for this woman that I had before. But my problem is I think the state of New Jersey should be able to run a background check because they're the ones holding the money for these prepaid funerals. They should be able to say that to you. Because if I had gone to the other funeral home in Flemington, they would have taken the money because they wouldn't have known. I didn't know. And the other problem was this woman was Jewish. And because she had Christmas trees and Christmas balls and all this other stuff, I thought she was Christian. So I'm burying her as a Christian. And then the funeral home came back and said, Marcia, she's Jewish. I said, oh, so now we got to start this whole thing all over again. And thank God for Rabbi Jaffe, because he was able to explain to me what to do. He and I were the only two people at the funeral. He explained every step to me, and we did it together. So she, you know, because I'm thinking to myself, I would have felt horrible if I found out later that I'd buried this woman as a Christian when she was Jewish.
I wanted to touch on something, if you don't mind, that you had asked before about the difference between why you need a volunteer guardianship organization as opposed to the state-run organization. And I think there are there's state-appointed guardians, and they're nice people. And when I worked hospice, I got the opportunity to deal with a good number of them by putting people in different facilities on hospice. But what struck me is that some of them did it all by phone. I faxed them or emailed them the paperwork, they signed off on it, they sent it back to me. At no point in the client's hospice journey did this state-appointed person have the availability or opportunity to go and visit that person and see them in the facility and spend that quality time with them. And just for whatever reason, they're overwhelmed, they don't live close enough, whatever the reasons were, volunteer guardianship offers that ability to not leave somebody alone in those situations and to have a one-on-one advocate for that person, which makes such a difference in the care across the board. So,
and there is such thing as called caregiver burnout. And how is it that you're able to sustain your commitment without getting burned out? What do you do for self-care?
I lasted 12 years, and then I blanked out.
12 years, it's quite a commitment. Wow.
It was like, and now I'm in my own personal life, I'm working on me, and not all of Hunterdon County. So I'm trying to be more focused on myself.
I think you have to realize that self-care isn't selfish. You know, in order to provide that care to other people, you need to do your walking or your meditation or whatever your particular version of self-care is. And that's the only way you're going to be able to continue to care for other people.
Because that's also what we tell people who, like family members who've got somebody at home, we tell them you've got to take care of yourself, because if God forbid anything happens to you and you have to go into the hospital, this person has no person to care for them. But sometimes it's hard to do it when it's you.
Well, you have to practice your own advice.
Yeah.
Well, it's a pleasure meeting you and discussing the important efforts on Vigu's part and the commitment that you folks have in serving these folks, the elderly in Hunterdon County. So I want to thank you very much, Lisa, Marcia, and Christine, for being here today and supporting Vigu and the community.